Don Fiore and I have been around for a long time. Don had the gift of a family that was very imbued with the history and culture of Italy, and they passed it on to him. I wasn't so lucky, so I'm kind of jealous of Don to have had that kind of privilege. And it's disappointing that maybe more of us Italian Americans haven't had the luck that Don had in choosing his parents. So he has always been a font of information about Italian history, and especially about Italo Balbo, and about the flight and aviation. And on a number of occasions we've collaborated, and he's always been a great gentleman about that. And now he is finally come to create the book that we all knew that he could have done. Could you have done this 50 years ago?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay. But it's done now, and he's a man now of great judgment and sophistication at his age. So we're pleased to have Don. He's unassuming, and he's a great personality to have, and a great resource to have for our community. And I urge you to read all of his columns word for word. You ever think about putting out a book on all your columns, and a collection of your columns?
My children have suggested that.
Okay, well, if we can help, we'll be glad to help at the Casa Italia Library. Let's not delay. Don Fiore, the author of the book today that you're all going to buy and give us Christmas gifts. So, Don, take it away.
Thank you. To begin with, first thank you to Dominic and for everybody at the Cultural Center here. Been very, very accommodating to me, more than I ever expected. And secondly, I really want to thank everybody here for coming. You don't know how much that really means to me, to see the interest in not just the book, but in the topic of which the book is. As Dominic mentioned, okay, and I was here on Wednesday, and I mentioned it to a group of us who was here. I learned this about Balbo when I was pretty young, and the Chicago American, I don't know if you're old enough to remember the Chicago American, they used to have a feature column. It was a problem-solving column. Like if you were trying to get an insurance claim fulfilled, or you couldn't get a refund on a product, their staff would go and solve the problem. But they also usually devoted every column a small thing on Chicago history. So my father had told me, I must have been 10 years old, when my father, who was present when Balbo landed here, and his group landed in '33 at the World's Fair, had told my brother and I about this. And although my father was my hero in every imaginable sense, I was skeptical, because even at that age, I knew enough about aviation to know that there were no Italian aviators, right? I mean, who did you think of when you think about, you thought Wiley Post, Amelia Earhart, Charles Lindbergh, or maybe a German guy or a French guy or a British guy, whoever mentioned Italian. So if you look in the American archives, Chicago American Archives, you'll see a letter from some 11-year-old kid asking, I've been told that an Italian aviator named Italo Balbo flew to Chicago in 1933. Is this a fact? And they responded, oh, of course it's a fact, and quite a bit about it. So I always had that skepticism. I wasn't sure, and that was conditioned by what I had seen in the outside world. In the inside world, as Dominic mentioned, I was blessed to have my father, who he was a plumber, but he was also a musician, and he played in Italian bands at all the feasts and everything, almost from the moment he came over here. And he imbued so much of this into me. about, you know, and I used to look up animals, but then I go to the outside world and I get an entirely different depiction of what my ethnicity was supposed to be, all right? And it wasn't supposed to be what I'm hearing from my father, which started from the Romans on up, and it was all the most glorious things. And then I go in the outside world, and this is what I would get. It would be just the opposite. But this led me to be a little bit curious about General Balbo, and I read, but, you know, in those days, we couldn't Google stuff, obviously. You had to go to your library and get a book or look up an encyclopedia. And every aviation book I found, there was minimal mention of this. Time passed. In the 1980s, I had started a mail order business for Italian imports, okay? And this, the inspiration behind this was when I was in Italy in '79, I seen all this cool stuff that to me was the greatest stuff in the world. And I thought, wow, this is gonna go big, let me bring it here. And they were posters of 19th century Italian advertisements and operas and books and records and all this stuff. I thought it's gonna be great. So I started this mail order business and I imported all this stuff over, and we didn't do all that well, unfortunately. Because if you would go to the different feasts and stuff, they had gifts, there'd be things like Mafia staff car bumper sticker. You know, those are things that would be selling. And I said, well, if they like that crap stuff, they're gonna love this stuff, all right? I had little Italian toy soldiers and stuff. No, couldn't give the stuff away. Really ahead of my time. I was getting those posters for 25 cents a piece from Recording. You go online in the 90s, I almost had a heart attack. There were my posters, $90. They were selling for. So I really was premature in that. Anyway, among the things that I was getting, importing were record album sets. And there was one by Funicetra. It's called Cartoline da Little Italy. And they were songs in Italian-American neighborhoods, because Italy had something, the Italian-American neighborhood had something called macchetta, that was like vaudeville. And they were, you know, you go into theater and stuff, the artists performing. And there was a song on the album called O Volo de Pinedo, is a Neapolitan, the flight of the Pinedo. And I'm listening to this, a fantastic song. I'm listening to this, and she says, Gilda Mignonette was a famous Neapolitan singer. She's talking about some aviator named Francesco di Pinedo, who flew across the Atlantic twice, and this was in '27. And every verse ends with, "E tutto mondo sanno fa parlar." Anybody who speaks Neapolitan knows what that means. That means that the whole world is talking about him. And I'm thinking, well, if they were, they sure stopped, because I never heard of this guy. So I went to, this would be in the 80s. I went to the Elmhurst Library, and they had a great, in those days you used to have microfilm, and you could look up old newspapers. So I looked at the New York Times, and the 27, and this guy's all over the map. Headlines. You know, who ever heard of Di Pinedo? Nobody. So the more and more I researched on him, I wrote to the Italian Air Force Historical Department, and they just sent me a ton of stuff. And I just couldn't believe, how has this guy been forgotten? In his time, he was considered possibly the greatest pilot in the world, because he had flown so many places. He flew from Italy to Japan, via Australia, the first one to circumnavigate Australia by air. He flew across the Atlantic, first one to fly across the Brazilian rainforest. And the real kicker, when he landed in the United States, his plane was the first foreign aircraft to land in the United States by its own power. Who knows that? Nobody knows that, right? It's nowhere to be seen. So that re-perked up my interest in Italian aviation, because I really don't have a lot of background in aviation, but I'm hearing about all these different aviators that were supposedly so great back then, and they're just totally obliterated. Because the aviation books that I would read, nobody mentioned Di Pinedo, and Balbo would get very little mention. So the more and more I studied, and I gotta thank the Italian Air Force probably the most, because they gave me the most information on it, just an abundance of it. And I had put together my first manuscript, and it was about Italian aviation, the story leading all the way up into Balbo. Now here what we see, this is the PowerPoint presentation I had prepared back like around 2000, because I used to do talks on it. This is the name of the flight, Balbo's flight. It was La Crociera del Decennale. That means the 10th anniversary crossing, literally, that's what it means. And you see already we got Roma, Chicago, New York, and Roma. And this is the subject of my book, and it was a fantastic thing. Can we move on? All right, so to begin with, I want to go back step a little bit because, you know, most people and there's nothing, I'm criticizing the United States because every country does this, but, I'm sorry? We all, you know, you ask who invented the airplane, you're going to say the Wright brothers. But if you go outside of the United States, you go to, you know, certainly Latin America and a lot of places in France, they're going to say it was Alberto Santos Dumont, who was a Brazilian. And 1906, he built his plane, Harvard in air. So, you know, if you go to Italy and encyclopedia say who invented the telephone, what's it going to say? Antonio Meucci, right? So every country does that, okay? But around that time, everybody was involved in airplanes, not just the Wright brothers. Everybody was trying to build it. Italy was right on it. These are some photos. That's Mario Calderara. He was the first Italian to get a pilot's license. That would be about 1908. This was a manufacturer who turned out to be Balbo's plane. They started out, their brand name was Savoia. It was actually called Società Nome di Costruzione Aeronautica. Later became Marchetti, Savoia Marchetti. And Savoia was the name of the Italian royal family. That was the House of Savoia. Italy had one of the first aerial meets in the world where they invited aviators from all over. This would be like around 1907, 1910. And that is the first Italian woman pilot, Rosina Ferraio. And she got her pilot's license in 1910. And she was a heck of a woman. She volunteered during World War I to form a woman aviators volunteer corps that would fly to the front to retrieve wounded soldiers and bring them back. And the Italian High Command, unfortunately, said absolutely not. No women are going on the front, you know. But that's the type of girl she was. She was a very, very aggressive. Can we see what's next? All right, so 1911. In 1911, Italy went to war against the Turks, and they became the first country in the world to use airplanes for war on the battlefield. And there's a picture of two of them now. I don't know if you can notice, this is the aviator Rossi, Captain Calamanti. These two things are hand grenades on his chest. And the Italians, I'm not boasting about this, but they were the first ones to do reconnaissance by air, aerial assault, and aerial assault was Lieutenant Giulio Gavotti in 1911 November. He was on a reconnaissance mission, but he brought a couple of grenades, and when he flew over enemy position, he just tossed some grenades for fun. But that went down as the first bombardment. And everything else, the only two modern military uses of airplanes they didn't do was troop transport, because the planes were so small, and air-to-air combat, and that was because the enemy didn't have airplanes. But everything else they did. They brought cameras on board to take maps, and they take a picture, they bring them out, make composite maps. It's very brilliant. So that was the first guy to fly in Libya. That was, his son actually wrote to me. God, I'm forgetting all these names now. Anyway, can we see the next one? I'm just gonna, now we come to World War I. That's where they really come of their own. Everybody comes of their own, because when they were in Libya with the airplanes, every major power was there with they all sent their reporters from their newspapers, and they're all writing back, you should see what the Italians are doing in Libya. We better get our airplanes in order, because someday we're gonna need an air force. And they all did. They started to build it. So we come to World War I. Italy had 88 airplanes, the army, at the start of the war. At the end of the war, they had 11,968. So you can see how they stepped up production. So that's a Caproni bomber. They were the first ones to strategic bombing. This is the #1 Italian ace. Now this is a SVA biplane. What was so cool about this one, this was developed by Ansaldo. Ansaldo was a shipbuilding company. And they went into business building airplanes like everybody else did. That plane was so beautiful that I remember one of the aviators was flying. He landed at a meet with the SVA. What's cool about it, it started out rectangular, but at the tail, it somehow transformed to be triangular. You don't even notice how the transformer is. And the way he described it, I saw our SVA parked there, and there was British planes, French planes. He said it was like a Stradivarius parked among all these old cardboard boxes, you know. But that's when they started to show their brilliance in design, okay? Because the Italians not only built powerful machines, they built really cool-looking machines. So can we see the next one? After the war, the Italians had all those 11,000 airplanes. What are we going to do with them? They had mass demobilization, right? Now, all these war contracts were cut because Italy was bankrupt in this war. They spent so much money. And they had all these planes. What are we going to do with them? So they thought, let's open them up to foreign markets. So they got all these young, this is Arturo Ferrarin. He flew to Japan, Tokyo, Japan. It was incredible what he did. And in SVA, they started to fly around trying to find new markets. So their aviators would fly a plane and they would try to set a record or do some milestone like that, and then see if anybody wants to write a purchase order out. And that was pretty successful, that they were able to move their planes. Can I see the next one? All right, so La Regia Aeronautica, as Mussolini, it's Aldo Finzi, was founded in 1923. That's the Royal Italian Air Force. And here's the thing, by this time Mussolini was already in power. The thing that everybody, I find a lot of people aren't aware of this. They think of Mussolini and they think of him being like Hitler, that he was the top guy in Italy like Hitler later on was top guy, but he wasn't. The top guy in Italy always was the king, His Majesty the King. Mussolini was the prime minister, but the real head of state was His Majesty Vittorio Emanuele, is the king. That's why it's called the Royal Air Force. Regia Aeronautica means the Royal Italian Air Force. They were the second country in the world to establish an air force as an independent military arm. The only other one before them was Britain, was the Britain's Royal Air Force. The first guy is Aldo Finzi. He was an ace from World War I. He ran it for a couple of years and got involved in a scandal. They say he was taking payments from Sinclair Oil for to fuel the Air Force, and he was dismissed. Can we see the next one? All right, so this is the March on Rome, which we talked about before. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Italian history, but after the war, Italy was in real bad shape, and one new party arose called the Partito Nazionale Fascista. It was a fascist party, and these were the four triumvirs, the four leaders of it. And here's Balbo, Mussolini, Di Vecchi, and Emilio Di Bono. They eventually, the king appointed Mussolini prime minister, and that's when it started to take off. Can we see the next one? No,
Sorry
the
about
other
that.
one. It's all right. All right, so there's Italo Balbo. It shows you how he's matured all the way. That's him as a high school student. Now, Balbo, he came from a middle-class family. You'll read this in my book. His father was a school teacher, and they had a very literate household. His father encouraged everybody to read. And so by the time he was a teenager, he had developed into, when we say Republican, we don't mean like our party, the Republican Party. Republican means you believe in a republic-style government, okay? And his father was a monarchist, so they didn't get along too well, but he was a fervent Republican, and his hero was Giuseppe Mazzini. And Giuseppe Mazzini, if you know who he was a 19th century, because Italy was divided. We all know about that? Until they had that long, we got our War of Independence, the United States. Italian history, you got the first War of Independence, the second War of Independence, the third War of Independence. It took them a long time because of a different situation. Mazzini was a spiritual leader for the movement to turn Italy united as a republic. Okay, when it did unite, it was a monarchy, but he always adhered to republicanism. So did Balbo. That's him in the war, that's him after the war, that's him when he was just appointed to the Air Ministry, that's him when he flew to America. We see the next one? You'll read, if you get the book, you'll read more about Balbo. There he is in the United States. We'll find out in 1929. He was appointed to the Air Ministry eventually. In 1929, they had a International Air Conference in the United States, and Balbo came representing Italy, and that's where he is here. And they went all over. Can you see the next one? That's him with the mayor of New York. Next one, please. That's him with Henry Ford. Now, after the conference was over, Balbo had come with his wife, and I always feel sorry for his wife. His wife was named Emanuela, and everybody went home, but he said, we're staying because we're going to take a tour of the United States. So his wife's probably thinking, oh, great, we're going to see Niagara Falls and we're going to see the Grand Canyon. No, He went to Ford Motor Company. He went to all these industrial sites to study their. Can you imagine how bored she was? How much she thought she would get a tour, but it really impressed him, and he made a lot of friends here, and he got to see the United States in its full industrial might, which made him think, and he said, any country that declares war against the United States is out of their mind. Because when he saw the energy, especially during the 1920s, and the power that this country had, he said, there's no way anybody could beat it. Can we see the next one, please? Well, that's just him still in the United States. All right, so when he got back, they founded the Italian Air Force Academy. That's what that is. And it's at Orbitello, which is a little north of Rome, a little lagoon. Its military use goes all the way back to the Etruscans. And he tried to institute as much as he absorbed in the United States and made this really modern. He told all of the workers and all the students, the day starts at 8 o'clock, not at 10, not whenever you get up, whenever you feel like coming in. I want you at your desk at 8 o'clock. He installed a pneumatic tube system, you know what that is, like at the bank? Back and forth. And then he found out he had to take it out because guys were ordering their lunch from the cafeteria, and it was being sent to them, and this was gumming up the work. So it took him a long time that he was trying to Americanize their thoughts, okay? That's why the idea of coming in whenever you want, all that is leaving, taking a nap, no. Now we're working 9 to 5. Can I see that one, please? Okay, these are different great aviators at the time that were gonna eclipse under Balbo. This is Antonio Locatelli. He did the first flight over the Andes. That's Umberto Nobile. Anybody know who he is? Okay. General Nobile, he was a believer in lighter than air aircraft. And he piloted the Norge. That was the first flight over the Arctic Ocean. This was like 3 days after Byrd flew to the pole and back, but they were just about to take off. And they flew all the way from Spitsbergen, Norway, to Teller, Alaska, the first flight. And then they dropped it was sponsored by Norway, Italy, and the United States. Lincoln Ellsworth was the United States. He supplied the money. Roald Amundsen, the great explorer, was representing Norway. And Umberto Nobile, who built and manned the airship, representing Italy. So all three banners were dropped when they flew over the pole. That's Ferrerin, the guy who flies from Japan. But this guy, that's DiPinedo, the guy who all the world was speaking of. And he was the brains behind all of the mass flights. If you read the book, you'll find out why. Can we see the next one? Yeah, this is just a map showing where all of them flew. This orange is DiPinedo. This is DiPinedo. And so on and so forth. This guy flew navigated Africa. Can I see it all? I don't want to bore you guys to death. Let's speed up a little bit. All right, so now we're at the World's Fair. Everybody knows about the World's Fair in 33? Okay. The World's Fair in 33, we had two World's Fairs in Chicago. Does everybody know that? One was in 1893. The other one was in 1933. 1933, they're completely different. The 1893 one was looking back at all the accomplishments we had made since Columbus came here. The 1933 one is looking forward at the future that they believe is going to be technology. Now, 1933, if you know American history, is what? It's in the heart of the Great Depression, right? Why would you have a World's Fair then? Well, they thought that this would generate hope, that when you see this is going to be a better tomorrow and everything like that. So Italy, can we see the next one? Italy, meanwhile, this is just to show you the image Italy was trying to give of itself. It wanted to give itself a up to the minute, we're modern, everything. Can we see the next one? All right, so with that in mind, that's the Italian pavilion. And it was the biggest pavilion at the fair. Italy was represented, even if you see the guidebook from the fair, say nobody even comes close to represent themselves as much as Italy. And there's two reasons for that. In the 1893 fair, if you read about that, Italy's not even mentioned. It doesn't have a pavilion. Everybody's got a pavilion. France, Brazil, Britain. Everybody's got, Italy's nowhere to be seen. Does anybody know why? Okay, I bet you some of you do. What happened in Louisiana in 1891? Anybody know? What happened? they hung, they lynched, right. They lynched 11 Italian nationals who were acquitted for the murder of a sheriff down there. And a mob stormed the jail, took them all out. The youngest was a 14-year-old boy. That was the largest mass lynching in American history. And Italy, because they're Italian nationals, demanded reparations for the families and then a formal apology. And the United States said, no, screw you. So Italy said, well, we're out. And they backed out of the fair. Then eventually, the United States paid $25,000 to each of the families. They broke off diplomatic relations, then they restored them, but by that time it was too late. So now they had a second chance. They went all guns out. We see the next one. Now, at the same time, and in 1934, the second year, and this is really interesting because the Italians are going out of their way to show how modern they are. That airplane even, or that building even looks like an airplane with the wing and everything. And if you went inside, all you would see is newsreels and diagrams of how great their technology is, how their power plants are generating so much electricity. A bunch of Italian Americans, however, put their own separate exhibit, and it undid everything that the Italians were trying to do. They depicted Italy as a place of singing waiters and dancing peasants, sleepy donkeys, all of the stereotypes, okay? And it completely undermined what the Italian government was trying to do. Can we see the next one? This was the inside of the Italian pavilion. Can we see the next one? Well, these are different Italian manufacturers of airplanes. They had at least 12 manufacturers. Next one. All right, so the plan of the flight, when Balbo started to talk about that, he had decided, first he did, the first mass flight was to Spain. That involved over 60 aircraft. Nobody ever seen this before. 60 planes, formation flight from Italy to Spain. Not that big of a deal. Okay. The next one was to the Soviet Union, which is interesting because that was a communist country, and the Italians was a fascist country, yet they had pretty good relationships, surprisingly. That was pretty successful. They ended up selling planes to the Soviets. But they really wanted to cross the Atlantic. So they aimed at the South Atlantic first. And that they achieved, we talk about in the book, but his real goal was, I want to do the North Atlantic. I want to aim for Chicago. And so they started his planning committee, and when we talk about the flight, it wasn't the flight itself that captured the world's imagination. The flight was, of course, big. What was really captured the world's imagination, and one of all the accolades, was the ground network, the support network. You saw the 24 planes. What you didn't see was this massive ground support network that took them 2 years to create, okay? And what they did in that, the flight was going to go in stepping stone fashion. This Iceland, then they cross. That's the biggest, most dangerous one, okay? And then they find their way to Chicago. Every point along the way in advance, 8 months in advance, they established landing bases. They sent usually it was a major or colonel there with a whole crew. They set up a radio network. They set up, all the things were set up with spare parts, ground support system, medical system, room and board. It was all along the way. There was no surprises. The radio, ground to air and plane to plane thing was the largest, broadest radio communication network to that date in the world. That all the way along the route, the Royal Italian Navy, that's ships all the way along the route. And so it was continual every hour on the hour. The pilots got weather report, water temperature, wind speed, all this information. No surprises. Then when they would land at their base, team of mechanics would jump on the plane, give them an overhaul, inspection, everything like that. It was so perfect, so well planned. The idea up to that point of an aviator, you thought of somebody like Wiley Post or Lindbergh hopping into their airplane and flying by the seat of their pants, right? This was something the world had never seen. This was the future of aviation. If we're going to do commercial aviation, we're not going to jump on. You're going to have constant, number one priority is safety, elimination of all needless risk. And he said that over and over. He had a press conference, Balbo, before the flight, on the eve of the flight, and he said, actually, the most difficult task is already behind us. And that's what he was talking about, setting up this massive ground support network. And he said, we're going to attempt to fly to America, and he explained, And he ended it by saying, "You'll notice that I said attempt. Because if anything happens that in any way jeopardizes the safety of the squadron, we're gonna go back." All right, so clearly this was a whole new view of aviation. And that's why when they came here, everybody went nuts. It wasn't just the fact that they flew across the Atlantic, although that was a remarkable thing because they were the first ones to fly 24 planes across the Atlantic at once, and not just fly them in formation. All right, that was just incredible to do that. The ground support, you see it next? This is the plane. What a beautiful piece of work. This was developed by Alessandro Marchetti. It's a seaplane, because the Italians really believed in seaplanes. And you can understand why, because it got so much coast, right? And what the idea was, instead of building an expensive airport, just land it on the water, right? And that was simple. I mentioned Di Pinedo, he envisioned, a big proponent for seaplanes. He thought someday commuters in the suburbs would fly to their jobs in the city in seaplanes. They'd have residential ponds, they'd park, and they'd fly to ports in the city. That didn't come out that way. But this is a seaplane. It's 70 feet from tip to tip. It's got 2 hulls in there. That's where you can store your crew. The cockpit is in the center. The engine is on top. And the engine is Isotta Fraschini. Some of you might even have heard of Isotta Fraschini. They used to manufacture automobiles in the 1920s. They were considered the rival to Rolls-Royce. So a lot of Hollywood people like Mary Pickford, Rudolph Valentino, they all drove Isotta Fraschinis. But that was an engine. The engine was 2 engines, 1 pusher, 1 puller. Each one was a V18. Think about that for a minute. V18, okay? The power behind that. You see the next one? There it is. Isn't it gorgeous? Now the engine is up on top to eliminate water spray from affecting it. Can you see the next one, please? I want to get to where you can see the engine with the valves on. Next one, please. That's employees of manufacture to show you the durability of the wing. Now stand up. Can you see the next one, please? There it is. Isn't that beautiful? What a beautiful thing. You know, as a matter of fact, we've got a little model here, if you guys want to see it, what it looked like. I've got a model this big still in the box. I scared to build it. Can you see the next one? Yeah, it's just a picture. This plane, when it was finally built, it made 15 world records. You see the next one? There's the crew, 96 guys. I want to speed through. That's the formation to the United States. Each plane had the captain, pilot, the first 4 letters of his name, Balbo in the lead, and then so on. It would red, squadron, black squadron, red, white, and green. The tails were marked with those colors. You see the next one? That's getting ready. It's an ITALO. Next one. Aren't they beautiful? Next one. That's a good. Everybody remember Domenica del Corriere? It's a magazine. This was a Sunday magazine for the Corriere, Corriere or newspaper. Go ahead. That's them flying over the Alps. That's them on their way to Holland. Go ahead. That's the Balila. It was one of the submarines along one of the ships along the Atlantic. It gives them information. Go ahead. Go ahead. It's a World's Fair. Next one, please. That's them arriving in Chicago. Now, when they flew in formation, the planes were not even. They were all staggered as far as altitude, height. So you could see, if you were the pilot, you could see all the planes. Next one. That's them touching down. Next one. All right, that's the ship where they were supposed to, they didn't show up till 5 o'clock on July 15th. And a lot of you, if you live here in Chicago, the weekend of July 15th, what was going on that weekend?
Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel.
Feast of Our Lady of Mount Carmel. Absolutely. The biggest feast, a lot of people don't like to hear this, but the biggest feast in the United States west of the East Coast was Our Lady of Mount Carmel. And my father was on site because my father played with the Stracchia band. There's a picture of the band in Dominic's office, which became Caliendo's Banda Napolitana and the Maestro Caliendo. Would you stand up, please? There's our band leader. I'm fortunate enough to have been playing with the band for almost 45 years, I think. But my father played too, and he was playing back then. And back then, the band always had a concert at the feast on Saturday nights. And they were scheduled to go on at the Melrose 78th, and none of the musicians, my dad said, nobody wanted to leave the fair. Once to go to Melrose Park, you know? we're here, we're seeing Balbo. And the poor Maestro Strelke had to force them all on the streetcar. Come on, we got an engagement. Anyway, this ship was waiting there to greet them. That ship is the SS Wilmette, and it's got a real dark place in Chicago history, because before it was the SS Wilmette, it was the, I'm losing my mind. What's the ship that tipped over? The Eastland. It was the Eastland, and the U.S. Navy restored it and rechristened it at the SS Wilmette. And that's the ship that they used. It was a gunboat that they used to welcome Balbo. And his men, they had a big party planned in there, but it was too late in the afternoon, and this happens all the way through the flight. Too late in the afternoon, so they cancel that, now push the next one. So that's Governor Horner, Henry Horner with Balbo. That's when they did their State Street Parade. That's Soldier Field. That's their schedule. We'll talk about that. You go next one. Go ahead. That's the banquet at Stevens Hotel. Next one. That's in New York now. I'm going tomorrow. That's Mayor Kelly giving him the key to the city. You see the next one? There they are. That's a holy name. They went to Mass on Sunday, which is interesting when you read that in the book, because they keep these guys up till the wee hours of the morning with one banquet, one ball, one dinner dance after the other. And they were supposed to go to Mass on Sunday morning, and Saturday night they're out literally to 4 in the morning. So they had to call up and say, look, we're going to be a little late. And they didn't get to Mass till 12:30. It was noon Mass. And it was the first time that Cardinal Mundelein, who was celebrating the Mass, had ever delayed Mass. The Mayor Kelly knows that. He said it's the first time this ever happened. So they all staggered into the Mass. They were at the front rows, and they stood stiff through the whole thing. Next one, please. Oh, they went to Fort Sheridan, and they saw an air show there. Next one. This is where they made Balbo a member of the Sioux tribe. Next one. He was so thrilled about that. It made his day. Next one, please. Well, this shows you how the commercial capitalist idea of making the most, everybody jumped in. There's even a neat little Balbo here, restaurants. Can you see the next one? Next one, please. This is some of the galley they sold. They even had bubblegum cards. Next one, please. There he is on time. Next one. It's Standard Oil. This is the one I love. Look at it. See him wearing his alpino hat? This is from Carson's. The Royal Squadron, how current events of the day inspire fashion. It's all there, the same swagger and daring attitude of the wide visibility General Balbo for $5. There's a camera. It's really interesting if you look in the newspapers. Everybody's jumping on board. This is some pictures of him. That's him at like 4 in the morning. You see, smoking a cigarette. That's him with Amelia Earhart. Next one. That's him at Grand, yeah, anyway. We saw that. That's his speech. There he is. Go ahead. That's the ticker tape parade. They didn't know what ticker tape was. So all this stuff, then they're looking at it. Well, they look, what is this? What is this? What is this? Yeah, okay. Next one. Yeah, it's just all quotes. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm just going to jump to the end. Go ahead. When he came back, you know, he was named governor of Libya. He was relieved from his post at Regia Aeronautica, and that's because he had become so immensely a celebrity popular, not only in the United States, but in Britain and France and all around the world, that Mussolini was really worried, okay? And Balbo was not like any of the other guys in Mussolini's group. Balbo was no yes man. He used to tell Mussolini, go get screwed. I mean, he just was very independent. And he had the popularity and the nerve to be a threat. So after he got back, Mussolini kicked him out of the Air Ministry and appointed him governor of Libya, which was an Italian colony at that time. And he governed very enlightenedly compared to other governments at the time. His goal was to make all the people there Italian citizens, not colonials, you know. Then in 38, next one. That's him behind his cockpit. Next one. Yeah, that's when he's killed. In 38, I'm sure if you know your history, when Mussolini, to appease Hitler, passed the anti-Semitic laws, okay, which in Italy were a joke because there were so many exceptions to the rule that they didn't apply to practically anybody, but they were there. Balbo made the deal with Mussolini, okay, I'll go to Libya and stay out of Italian affairs, but you stay out of the government, the affairs of the colony. And so Balbo just totally ignored him. And he was obliged, you read this in the book, from time to time to have foreign dignitaries. And one time Goering, the German, Hermann Goering came to visit him. And he went out of his way to show Goering how Jews have complete freedom here in Libya. So we had a banquet for Goering. He invited a bunch of top Jewish citizens to sit at the banquet and gave him a tour of the Tripoli synagogue. And I mean, he just went out of his way to stick it in his face. He told Mussolini that you're licking Germany's boots. That's what he told him. Anyway, 2 weeks after the war started, Balbo's plane was shot down over Tobruk by Italian guns. Okay, Italian anti-aircraft artillery. And nobody really has found the exact reason. Was it a mistake or what was it? Can we see the next? That's the column, that's the street. They named the street after him. The Italian government sent that column that still exists. It's a Roman column from Ostia. It's 2,000 years old in the Park District. It sits on the side of the Italian Pavilion. Next one. There it is when they unveiled it, the Italian Pavilion. Next one. That's what it says on the pavilion. Next one. Then they, like we saw, the Columbus statue. At the base of the Columbus statue that nobody pays attention to, it says, "This monument is in glory to wings of victory led by Italo Balbo." Next one. Yeah, next one. That's his quote. The next one. Now, this is the work of Frank DiPiero. Frank, can you stand up? Stand up. Frank, around 2016, went out of his way to work with the Park District to see what we could do to restore the column, because it's in bad shape. You know, that column has stood 2,000 years in Rome and has eroded more in being here in Chicago since '34 than all those 2,000 years because of the lake and the wind. Next one. Next one, please. So this is what they came up with. They restored the column and put this protective thing around it to kind of lessen the effects. Next one. There's an article. There's Frank. Next one. That's it. They needed 400,000 to restore the monument. So Frank, 400, right?
To build that structure.
To build that structure and restore it. What was the restoration cost?
What was what?
Restoration cost.
Well, so at the end of it, when I could see that there was no way in the world that we would raise that kind of money, we kind of got more into brass tactics, just the restoration of the column. And at that time, they shot me a price of 100,000.
Shouldn't be that much to raise, right?
No.
But it was impossible. You couldn't squeeze a nickel. Anyway, that's where we stand. I talked enough with you guys. The book is much more in detail. I'm not trying to push it, but we go into much greater detail on that. We're going to take a short break, and after the break, then we'll resume. We're going to have a panel discussion with, yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question. If you want a short personal episode to tell about Italo Balbo, Italian aviator. My father, I'm 81. My father was a pioneer, radio telegraphist, and aviator. He became also a pilot of Ala Vittoria.
Good.
He was flying with that kind of plane. I always have the picture of my father with me. This is the episode I want to tell you to stress how important was the planning of
Yeah, of course.
that. My father was the one choose. He was supposed to go. But at the last moment, they canceled him. They got another one because the other one was lighter.
Wow.
Imagine. Also, the weight was important.
Right. Yeah,
And for
everything was
instance, my
done.
wife now was asking why 24 planes?
I didn't
But
know.
they were bringing everything. I mean, if you, in that kind of plane, there were the pilots, the marconists, so-called, that is the radio telegraphist, and the motorist, and the one where for war there were also the
Right.
shooter and the bombardier, you know? And they had to bring all the stuff. My father, it's happened many times alla Italia, but the plane couldn't
Right.
go away again, so they were waiting for a new engine. So
Yeah,
that's
no,
why they should be.
That's a real good point, because the other thing you see, they calculated the fuel amount down to the nickel. How much fuel we're gonna need to this point, to that point, because the more fuel you had, the more that penalized the plane, there was more weight that you had. So you see that bounce, but you make a very good point, how everything had to be considered. How much does this pilot weigh versus how much that one, that's how tight it was. But it went off really well, and that's what caused everybody to celebrate it, is because this is the way we're gonna go in the future now. So, and maybe afterwards, we're gonna do a little discussion with Commendatore Allegrini, the president of DF, Carlo Vaniglia, who is a very big proponent of the preservation of the monument, fierce proponent, and of course, Frank DePiro. Okay, so we wanna take a break?